and the expanding circle being countries where English is taught as a foreign language. Okay, good. A nice mix. I am from an inner circle country, believe it or not. From Scotland in the UK. Although my wife, being my Japanese wife, when we first met, she did compliment me on my English, assuming I was German. One more question for you. If you had to choose one of these statements, which one would you choose as being the most truthful, the most accurate? English is democratic, English is neutral, or English is imperialist? How would you describe, if you had to choose one of them?
In which century?
Yeah. Right now it is present tense. Would you describe English as being democratic? Neutral?
No.
Imperialist?
It's just for the sake of argument.
Yeah, that's exactly the point. Spoiler alert, I don't agree with anything. And of course, the presentation is called, it's the question of English as a global language, linguistic imperialism. Now, the linguist most readily associated with the idea of English being an imperialist tool is Robert Phillipson, who wrote the book, Linguistic Imperialism. And an interesting analogy I got from a 1996 article that Phillipson wrote with his fabulously named Danish wife. What's her name, please? Tove Skutnak Kagnes. They wrote an article in 1996, just before I came to Japan, and they said, in international activities there is a pecking order of languages, with English having much the sharpest beak, for a variety of reasons, political, economic and cultural. English having the sharpest beak. So to give you a visual representation of that, here we see, no prizes for guessing which one is English. At the top there, defecating, to use the polite word, on all the other languages. And I think that seems quite accurate in many senses. It's reasonable to say there are a lot of native English speakers who have a rather presumptuous attitude about the position of English throughout the world. These were things I actually just by chance came across within the last month. There are too many Spanish people, the receptionists speak Spanish, the food is Spanish, too many foreigners, and you guys are speaking Spanish too! And that came from an actual survey by Thomas Cook and Association of British Translations. That was somebody's actual response to Holland.
Because about Spain.
Yes! The other one, great location, clean but terrible service. Most of the staff can't even speak English properly. That one we come across all the time on TripAdvisor. So, there's no doubt that a lot of English speakers do have a very presumptuous attitude. Now, over the course of my 18 years living in Japan, I've had several incidents when they've led me to think about, am I just a cog in the machine towards Anglo-American global domination? And about 15, 16 years ago, I was in my local bar in Narita, having a pint, as you do, and there was a guy there sitting who was a Cockney London fellow, who had just arrived in Japan. He'd given up being a successful plumber, which is a very well-paid job in the UK, because he met a Japanese girl. He managed to fall out with her on his, basically the day before he flew over, whatever. He still came to Japan. And, you know, making conversation, I said to him, so did you arrange a job before you came? And this was the exact reply I got. Now, is anybody here from England? Okay, because I'm going to be really, really terrible here and try and fake a Cockney accent, okay? Nah, not even my ass speak the Queen's English, nah. If all the Yanks in job can get a job here, I have plenty of offers. Now, I am the job, okay? That's the Cockney slang for Scotsman, okay? So any Yanks and Scots that can get English jobs, he'll have no problems, because he speaks the Queen's English. Let's not even go into the idea of what is the Queen's English, okay? But, I mean, I admired his positive attitude and his honesty, but there's something quite alarming about this. This guy had just decided he was coming to Japan, and he had no background in teaching whatsoever. Had not even no certification, no experience whatsoever, and he just assumed that he could jump on a plane, come to Japan, and he will find well-paid work teaching English purely on the basis of his first language and his nationality, possibly even his ethnicity, if you want to go into that discussion as well. I should also add, he wasn't quite as suave as Michael came here. He looked a little more like that. Another thing that happened to me was not long after this, I was employed a couple of days a week working at an airline-related engineering company. And they had just been recently bought over by an American group. And the American parent group had decided to send an American boss to the company, despite the fact they had a whole structure of bosses and managers. This was a new guy going in on top. And he decided that all the managers should be using English. All the meetings, and every morning we have a meeting, it should be in English. So I was brought in to teach the 12 management level employees. Now, I managed, it was well paid, and I kept doing it for about 4 or 5 years as a part-time job. But I'll be honest, it was an absolute failure. I had 12 students who were supposed to come every day, twice a week, at an assigned time, and the average attendance was 4 or 5, and only 2 of them showed up regularly. I would have taken it personally, and I did. I cried a lot. But the thing that these guys were great fun. We would go out drinking regularly, and they'd all show up for that. 12 of them and me would go out drinking every 2 months, and that was fantastic fun. My Japanese improved immensely. But, you know, we had a good few drinks, and we talked, and we learned that, they would usually say, that's okay. But eventually we got to talk about it, and I said, well, why, what's the problem? Free English lessons during work time. You don't, you get out of work for a couple of hours, isn't that good? And they just really resented the fact they'd had these morning meetings. These guys have been in the job 10 years or more. And suddenly they were expected in English to talk about the same things.
That's right.
And, well, that's the second time with the elephant in the room mentioned. And you wonder why then people start to have a negative feeling.
That's right.
Well, this guy walks in, right, you're all using English from now on.
Yeah.
And of course, that's very unfair. So this idea of linguistic imperialism,
Genocide.
So, but first of all, I'm going to go through the first two. English is democratic, English is neutral. Now, the academic who's most thought of as the poster boy for English is democratic is David Crystal. Largely because in this book, which is a great book, he uses the word, he refers to English being democratizing, but in a very limited sense. The main reason he's considered the poster boy for English is democratic is simply because he argued against Philipson as it being imperialist. Therefore, he must think it's democratic. Although he did say language is democratic, which is another point. But there's nothing in Crystal that really advocates the idea of it being democratic. However, I do want to read something to you. Another viewpoint, which definitely does seem to be in favour of the notion of English being democratic. Its genius was, and still is, essentially democratic. It has given us the expression to the voice of freedom from Wat Tyler to Tom Paine, to Thomas Jefferson, to Edmund Burke, to the Chartists, to Abraham Lincoln, to the suffragettes, to Winston Churchill, to Martin Luther King. It was well equipped to be a world language, to give voice to the aspirations of the third world as much as the intercommunication of the first world. You notice they miss Jesus Christ as well. John, do you know where that comes from? But the story of English was in 1986, 30 years ago. I think there are a few people who would actually support this notion now. The idea of English is neutral. Well, if we accept the idea of linguistic relativity, Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, that your way of thinking, your way of perceiving the world is at least partly controlled by your language, then I don't think anybody could really argue that English is neutral. You could say that some African writers have mentioned, African linguists and writers have mentioned the idea that English was used as a neutral language, inverted commas, in countries where there were several languages and no easy choice of language, like places like Nigeria. Joshua Fishman, he did try, there was an argument in the 70s about linguistic neutrality, but the same writer 10 years later recanted completely. So So I think we can move on fairly quickly from it. English is imperialist. Now, Yukio Tsuda, who is a linguistics professor at the University of Tsukuba, he often comes across as being the biggest supporter of the notion of linguistic imperialism from English, based in Japan. And Tsuda applauds a lot of the African and the outer circle, both the outer circle and expanding circle linguists. He applauds them for their attempts to gain equal status for different forms of English, but he still believes that there is linguistic imperialism. Tsuda also mentions the word linguicide and linguicism. Linguicide being the idea of English killing other languages. Linguicism, I'll come back to that in a moment. English has been described by various writers as a Trojan horse, and it's even been offered as a justification for Al-Qaeda's activities. That was Chang and Wolf, probably about 10 years ago. Go back to the idea of linguicism. Linguicism being that one is forced to use the English language essentially, and to the point that any association with the native language is considered negatively. There have been some horrific things in the past. I'm going to murder pronunciations of African names here, I apologise now, okay? The writer, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, he is one of the people who heavily criticised people like Achebe for the use of English in their writing. Ngugi wa Thiong'o, he originally wrote in English, but then switched to his native language and then became quite vociferous in his criticism of those who continued to write in English. But one of the things that apparently happened to Ngugi was when the school he went to, if anyone was caught speaking their native language, EQ, around the school, they were either given 10 lashes with a cane, or they were actually forced to wear a metal sign saying either, I am stupid or I am a donkey. So you can kind of see, you can sympathise with the idea. However, Achebe has spoken at length of the fact that he has English as a tool and he likes to use it. He doesn't feel he should have to justify that. Another writer you could consider from a non-imperialistic background, Joseph Conrad, who liked not to use Polish for his writing, but English. Interestingly, Achebe referred to Conrad as, what was it? I think it was a bloody racist, I think was how he referred to it. That's another story as well. Sridhar Ramphal, which is a name which again I can't say properly. This guy was, he was Indo-Guyanese from the tip of South America. And he was leading a research study for basically it was UN-backed, about language and learning. And he said, regarding English, it is not the language of imperialism, it's the language we have seen that has evolved out of a history, of which we need not always be proud, but whose legacies we must use to good effect. So essentially saying, well, English may have spread for negative reasons, but it now exists as a tool, and to fail to use it would be highly counterproductive. Another expression used in the sense is linguistic Luddism. It seems to me that denouncing English or any other language as imperialist is to avoid focusing on the real issues, which are a legacy of imperialism, economic, structuralist, whatever you want to talk about. Lysandro said, if English can facilitate the process of universal disposition and loss, so it can be turned around and made to facilitate the contrary process of universal empowerment and gain. So in truth, I would reject any of these labels, as I already told you. But there are two things that we can say about English. One, we can say English is dominant. It's hard to argue with this. It's perhaps simply an accident of history. We had the British Empire so closely followed by the preeminence of the USA as the world's sole superpower. Interestingly, post-World War I, the peace conferences being held, French was assumed to be the language for the conferences, and it was only the US's involvement in these conferences for the first time, really, when all European countries would get together. It was the US taking part, but finally they agreed to allow English to be the second language. But French, even then, around 1915, French was still considered by far the international language. Now, another thing we can say is that English is pragmatic. Now, it's a lovely idea that, for example, in the EU, we could have all the languages being treated equally. There are 24 official languages and 40 in total. But in reality, in day-to-day running of the EU, only two are used: French and English. French, well, that makes sense. French is a language spoken in the three major houses of the EU, Brussels, Strasbourg, Luxembourg City. But English, I mean, if we were to go by the dominant language, that would be German. Number two would actually be Italian and English around the same point. This is a simple pragmatic fact. English makes sense because so many have it as a foreign language. And of course, that's self-perpetuating. If people want to get involved in the EU, they have to learn English. Now, so to Japan, if we accept that English is both dominant and is pragmatic, I think most people would accept at least some level of English teaching in Japan. But, you know, is it this idea of planting a flag here? I'm still trying to get a reaction. You know, go back to my company workers. Some of them had that feeling. And I also spent many years working in elementary schools training teachers. And that, I had so much sympathy for the teachers. Elementary school teachers took a job, never ever believing they would have to teach English lessons. And yet they were suddenly told, right, you're going to be leading English lessons. And it was traumatizing for a lot of them. So, what can we do? Do we accept that English has to be taught? Should it be taught at all levels? Some people argue that English, the effect on the Japanese language, the effect of English is already detrimental. The number of words which are infecting the Japanese language. And that itself is something interesting to look at. Why do English words join the Japanese language? An interesting Japanese linguist, Honnan, says that he believes simply because certain expressions, certain concepts are too wordy, they're too unwieldy to put into Japanese. Therefore, the English is often used because it captures meaning more accurately. There's also a lot of use of euphemism. English words are often used euphemistically in the Japanese language. Sexual words are often English words. It's very interesting around schools. You see words like skuru kansura. You know, there's no word for school in Japanese. There's no word for counselor. But my favourite euphemism in the Japanese language is this one. Hello, work. Lovely. I love that one. Brilliant. So, but if we accept that English has a position, then how do we go about teaching it? Do we make it compulsory? Do we teach it from elementary school? Do we make it a compulsory language in higher education as it is right now? Now, I'm very fortunate. I teach just there in NIC, and pretty much all our students have the goal of going overseas. Therefore, they all want to learn English, and they also want to learn the cultural aspects. So for us, it's kind of straightforward. We teach language, and we also teach aspects of Western English-speaking culture, because our students will require that. So, hello students. Now for me, it's easy in the sense that we know what way to go about teaching. But if you're teaching in a context where you're teaching English as a compulsory subject to science majors or economics majors or whatever, how do you teach that? Do you consider the idea that they should have to learn cultural aspects of English? Or should it be enough to teach simply English? English to me is kind of like fire, right? You may get burned by it, but does that mean you should give up using it? Or should you just take the time to learn to use it effectively for yourself? But again, the cultural aspect. Now, codification. If we accept that in Japan, many people will need to use English for communicative purposes, but they don't have any direct interest in the US, UK, or another English-speaking country, should they learn cultural aspects? Or would it be better to learn a standard Asian English? Now, I think that makes a lot of sense in many ways. But, oops. This comes from, it was again, Suda said, he gave the example that this was about, I guess, 10 years ago, whatever. Michael Jordan is more popular than Mao Zedong in China. Therefore, this shows westernization. And I thought about that, and I thought, well, I'm pretty sure Lionel Messi is more popular than David Cameron in the UK right now. Does that mean that I'm being Argentinized? Right? Yeah, it strikes me slightly absurd. So I think, you know, there can be cultural aspects, but we also have to accept that we don't have to be learning American and British culture with English. Having said that, half-baked quackery. This was Randall Quirk, big shock, who used this to refer to any attempts to allow English speakers in the outer or expanding circles to deviate from the British or American standards of English. But Catherine and Nelson said, quote this, they said, "To learn a language is to own it, and all cultures and individuals are entitled to adapt the language as they see it. If a typical American has no wish to speak or to be labelled as a British user of English, why should a Nigerian, an Indian, or a Singaporean user feel any differently?" You know, I think that's a really good point. For the Americans in the room, do you feel guilty about it? Do you think you really should be learning British English? I'm gonna get better at me and say no, right?
Only because it's fun.
This expression I used earlier, you jammy bugger. So I think that, you know, basically, we have to accept we have to use English, purely for its pragmatism, but how do we go about teaching it? And do we need to codify it? I think we do need to codify it to some level, otherwise it becomes a Wild West. But how do we go about that? I think that's the next big issue. And I'd love to hear your opinions on it, especially those of you who come from the outer and the expanding circles. And if we can't get used to English, well, come to my presentation next year, Esperanto for beginners. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Mr. Lawson, for your thought-provoking presentation. Now is the question and answer session. So, why don't you both come up here so we can address the questions, or unless you'd like to just do it from your
Should we
seats.
just sit down?
Okay, yeah, that's fine, yeah, sure. Okay, so who would like to start? Question?
Me.
Yes.
I'd like to ask them a question. Does anybody teach English to students who are not voluntarily studying English?
I used to.
You know, again, to me, you know, in your opinion, should we be teaching a standard American or British English? Or do you think there's a validity in the idea of having a codified world English?
I think teaching people that don't want to learn English is absolutely cruel. Just to step into a context like a workplace. This happened at my university. They told the librarians starting September 1st, everyone has to speak English. Anyone who enters the library can only speak English there, and as an English teaching professional, I found it absurd, cruel, ridiculous. We're in Japan.
The library must have been a nice quiet place to study.
Well, it got really interesting because the president of the university loves British English, so he required the librarians to work 12-hour days for about 3 weeks